The grand lobby of the Hargrove Grand Hotel smelled like money and fresh flowers. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, 200 guests in evening wear. And on his knees near the entrance, an old black man in a gray uniform quietly mopping a water trail left by the rain outside. Derek Coulter saw him from across the lobby and stopped walking. "Hey, you." Earl looked up. "I don't know if they told you this when they handed you that mop, but we don't let just any black man kneel on this floor. This marble costs more than your whole neighborhood." Earl moved to stand. Derek leaned forward. His shadow fell across Earl's face. No, stay down. That's actually the most useful you've ever looked." The investors behind him made a sound. Not quite laughter. The kind men make when they aren't sure yet if they're allowed to. Derek glanced back at them, loose, easy performing, and gestured toward Earl, like he was pointing at a broken fixture. 70 years old, and still can't figure out how a mop works. "You know what, just get him out. Front door. I don't care if it's raining." Victor took Earl by the arm and walked him outside into the cold November rain. Earl didn't struggle. He just looked down at the marble floor one final time and let himself be led out. The doors closed. "My apologies, gentlemen," Derek said, already turning away. "We've been having issues with the help." What this man did not know, the floor he was standing on, the windows above him, the marble beneath his feet, every inch of it, had been designed by the man he just threw into the rain. And in 48 hours, the mayor of Savannah would make sure he never forgot it. Janitor. Don't go anywhere you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Drop your location and local time in the comments right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the story that'll make you want to. Savannah, Georgia sits on a bluff above the Savannah River, and it remembers everything. It remembers the moss-draped squares laid out by James Oglethorpe in 1733. It remembers the antebellum mansions and the hands that built them. It remembers every name carved into every cornerstone of every building that still stands along its cobblestone streets. Savannah is not a city that forgets easily, but sometimes the people inside it do. Earl Washington was born in Savannah in 1950, in a house on the east side of town, where the streets were narrower and the city's memory was longest. His father worked at the port. His mother cleaned houses on the north side, the good side people called it, as if geography were the same thing as worth. Earl grew up understanding that the city had two faces, and that which face it showed you depended entirely on what it saw when it looked back. He was a quiet child, observant, the kind of boy who noticed the way a doorframe was jointed, the way a roofline met the sky, the way light changed when it passed through different kinds of glass. His third-grade teacher, Mrs. Adeline Cross, wrote in his report card, "Earl sees things other children walk past." She meant it as a compliment. She had no idea how far it would carry him. He earned a scholarship to Howard University in Washington, D.C. in 1968. Architecture. One of 11 black students in his program that year. He graduated in 1974 with honors, returned to Savannah, and spent the next decade fighting for commissions in a city that had never hired a black architect for anything larger than a church annex. He drew plans that sat in drawers. He submitted proposals that were returned without comment. He kept drawing anyway. In 1985, a man named James Hargrove Sr. called his office. Hargrove Sr. was one of Savannah's old money families, cotton, then shipping, then real estate. But he was also, by the standards of his time and class, an unusual man. He believed that the best work came from the most unexpected people. He had heard about Earl Washington through a city planning colleague. He had seen one of Earl's unrealized proposals, a mixed-use development on River Street, that the city had declined to fund, and he had driven to Earl's office on a Tuesday afternoon unannounced. He looked at the drawings on Earl's wall for a long time. Then he said, I want to build a hotel. I want it to last 100 years. And I want you to design it. Earl was 35 years old. It was the first major commission of his career. He spent 14 months on the design. He chose every material with the precision of a man who understood that buildings outlive the people who build them. The marble for the lobby floor, a warm cream stone with faint gray veining, he selected from a catalog of domestic suppliers, a quarry in Georgia he had visited personally to see the stone in natural light. The east atrium windows he angled at exactly 17 degrees to capture the morning sun between March and October. The service corridors he designed wide enough for 2 carts to pass without collision because he had watched his mother navigate narrow hallways with a cleaning cart for 20 years, and he understood that dignity lives in the details no one photographs. The Hargrove Grand Hotel opened in October 1987. It was reviewed in 3 architecture journals. 2 of them mentioned the building. None of them mentioned Earl's name. He kept working. In 1994, the city proposed a highway expansion that would have required demolishing the block on which the Hargrove Grand stood. Earl spent 18 months filing appeals presenting historical preservation arguments and attending planning commission meetings that ran past midnight. He did it without being asked. He did it because the building was his and no city ordinance had told him it wasn't. He won. The highway was rerouted. The hotel stood. By then, Earl had become a fixture in the life of the Hargrove family. James Hargrove Sr. called him a friend, genuinely, privately, in the way that costs something in a city like Savannah. When James Hargrove III was born in 1966, Earl had been present at the hospital. When the boy grew up and went into politics, Earl was the person he called when he needed to think clearly. Not for advice exactly, just for the steadiness that Earl carried like a second skeleton, something structural, invisible, load-bearing. When James Hargrove Sr. died in 2011, Earl sat in the front row at the funeral. Afterward, he went back to his drafting table and drew nothing for 3 weeks. The hotel changed hands twice after that. A regional hospitality group in 2015. Then Derek Coulter in 2019. Derek Coulter was 41 years old when he acquired the Hargrove Grand. He had inherited $12 million from his father. At 28, invested it in 3 mid-range hotel properties in the southeast, sold 2 at a profit, and used the proceeds to acquire larger properties. He was good at acquisition. He was less good at understanding what he had acquired. He knew the hotel was historically significant. He had the documentation, the original permits, the architectural filings, the preservation designation. He had a folder on his desk that contained Earl Washington's name, his credentials, his role in saving the building in 1994. Derek had been briefed on all of it during the acquisition process. He had read the first page and moved on. To Derek, the Hargrove Grand was an asset. A revenue-generating property with strong location fundamentals and an underperforming food and beverage program. Its history was useful for marketing. The people connected to that history were not. Patricia Monroe had worked in the hotel's housekeeping department for 22 years. She had been there before Derek, before the regional group, before the second ownership change. She knew the building the way longtime employees know buildings, not architecturally, but personally. She knew which elevator ran slow in cold weather. She knew which guest rooms got too much afternoon heat in July. And she knew Earl Washington. She had known for years that Earl came in twice a week to volunteer. She had quietly kept his name off the official roster, listing him simply as a part-time contracted cleaner, because she understood that visibility in this building had become, under Derek Coulter's ownership, a form of risk. She had been right to worry. On Monday morning, 2 days before the gala, Derek called a full staff meeting in the hotel's second-floor conference room. He stood at the head of the table in a gray suit that cost more than most of his staff's monthly salaries, and spoke for 11 minutes about brand elevation, guest experience metrics, and visual cohesion. He ended with this: anyone on this property who doesn't fit the image we're building here needs to be transitioned out by end of week. I don't care how long they've been here. This is a premium property now. Act like it. Nobody asked what fit the image meant. They didn't need to. Pat Monroe sat in the back row and looked at her hands. Monday morning, 6 o'clock. The service entrance of the Hargrove Grand Hotel faced a narrow alley off Abercorn Street, and at this hour it smelled like coffee grounds and dish soap, and the particular cold that comes off Savannah's streets in November, not bitter but present, the kind of cold that reminds you it's there without making a scene about it. Earl Washington came through that door the same way he always did, quietly. His gray uniform was pressed. His name tag, Earl Facilities, was clipped straight. He carried a small canvas bag with his supplies, a pair of work gloves, a spray bottle, a folded rag he'd washed himself the night before. He was 74 years old, and he moved at the pace of a man who had long ago stopped pretending that hurrying changed anything. Pat Monroe was waiting for him at the end of the service corridor. She had a cup of coffee in each hand, and an expression on her face that Earl recognized immediately. "How bad?" he said. She handed him the coffee. "He had a staff meeting yesterday. Said anyone who doesn't fit the new image needs to be gone by end of week." Earl nodded slowly. "And what does the new image look like?" Pat looked at him over the rim of her cup. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They stood in the corridor for a moment. The low hum of the building around them, pipes and ventilation, and the distant clatter of the kitchen starting its day. And Earl looked at the wall. Someone had painted it recently. A clean, neutral gray. The scuff marks he remembered from last year, the ones left by decades of carts and dollies and the ordinary friction of working bodies in a working space, all of it gone. Painted over, smooth and featureless. "Earl," Pat said carefully, "he doesn't know who you are. He just sees—" "I know what he sees," Earl said. "Not bitter, not hard, just true, the way the temperature is true, the way the distance between 2 points is true." Earl Washington had spent 50 years knowing exactly what certain people saw when they looked at him, and he had long since made his peace with the fact that their vision was their limitation, not his. He finished his coffee, set the cup on the shelf, pulled on his work gloves, and went to find his cart. The hotel in the early morning was a different building than the hotel that guests experienced. The chandeliers were dimmed. The lobby was empty and echoing. The marble floor, still faintly damp from the overnight cleaning, caught the low service lighting and held it in its grain the way stone holds warmth. Earl pushed his cart through the east corridor and stopped, as he always did, at the base of the atrium. The east windows were dark at this hour, but he knew what they would do in another 90 minutes when the sun cleared the roofed line across the street. He had calculated it in 1986 on a drafting table with a protractor and a set of sun angle charts he'd ordered from an engineering supplier in Atlanta. 17 degrees. The light would enter at 17 degrees and cross the atrium floor in a diagonal line that reached the far wall by 8:15, warming the space before the first guests came down for breakfast. He stood there for a moment, just looking. Then he went back to work. Marcus Webb found him in the east corridor at 6:45. Marcus was 29, broad-shouldered, with a business degree from Georgia Southern, and the particular energy of someone who had been underestimated recently and was still processing it. He'd been a bellhop at the Hargrove Grand for 14 months, and in that time he had learned 3 things. The guests tipped better when you used their names. The service elevator on the north side ran 30 seconds slower than the one on the south, and Earl Washington was the most quietly dignified person in the building. He didn't know why he believed that last thing. He just did. "Morning, Mr. Earl." "Marcus." They fell into their usual rhythm, Earl working Marcus, talking in the low, careful voice people use in empty buildings before the day begins. He told Earl about Derek's staff meeting, about the phrase visual cohesion, about the way nobody at the table had asked a single question. He pointed at the new lobby furniture, Marcus said it represented the direction of the property. Everything needed to align with that direction. He paused. It's beige furniture, Mr. Earl. That's the direction. Earl's mouth moved, something that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. Last week, Marcus continued, his voice dropping. He told a group of guests that the bellhop staff lacked polish. Right there in the lobby. We were standing 10 feet away. He looked at his hands. I have a business degree. I know you do, Earl said. Doesn't seem to matter much here. It matters, Earl said. Just not to him. Those aren't the same thing. Marcus looked at him. He wanted to ask something, you could see it forming, but before he could, the sound of the lobby doors opening reached them from the corridor, and both men turned. Congressman Raymond Osei came through the main entrance at 7:10 in the morning, 2 hours ahead of his scheduled check-in, because Raymond Osei had never in his life arrived anywhere at the time he was expected. He was 63 broad, with close-cut gray hair and the unhurried authority of a man who had learned that rooms adjust to him, not the other way around. He crossed the lobby, saw Earl at the far end of the east corridor. He stopped. His face opened into something unguarded and genuine. Earl Washington, he said loud enough that the front desk clerk looked up. You are still the only man I know who actually shows up. He crossed the lobby in long strides and embraced Earl, both arms, the kind of embrace that carries history in it. Raymond, Earl said, patting his back. You're early. I'm always early. You're never early. I'm early today. Osei held him at arm's length. Looked at the gray uniform, the name tag. His expression shifted, not pity, something more complicated and more respectful than pity. Still coming in. It's my building, Earl said simply. From the mezzanine above, Victor Sloan stood at the railing and watched the congressman embrace the janitor in the center of the lobby. His eyes moved between the two men. His jaw worked slowly. He took out his phone and typed a message to Derek Coulter. The old janitor knows the congressman. Thought you should know. The reply came in 40 seconds. Handle it. Tuesday morning, 9:15. Victor Sloan's office was on the second floor between the Revenue Management Suite and the staff scheduling room, a deliberate location Earl had always thought, for a man whose job was to sit between money and people and decide which one mattered more on any given day. The office door was open when Earl arrived. Victor was behind his desk. He gestured to the chair across from him without looking up from his screen. Earl sat. Victor closed his laptop with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. He folded his hands on the desk. His expression was professionally neutral, not unkind, not warm. The face of a man delivering a decision, not making one. Earl, we're restructuring the volunteer program. Effective end of this week, we won't be continuing with external placements in facilities maintenance. External placements, Earl said. That's right. I've been coming here for 11 years. We appreciate that. Victor's tone didn't shift by a single degree. The hotel is moving in a new direction. Our facilities team is being brought fully in-house. There won't be a role for volunteer staff going forward. Earl looked at him for a moment. Did Mr. Coulter ask for this? This is a management decision, which meant yes. Earl nodded slowly. He looked around the office, not searching for anything, just the habitual observation of a man who had spent his life reading spaces. The desk, the shelving, the wall to his left where someone had mounted a framed print between two filing cabinets. He stopped. It was an architectural drawing. Ink on drafting paper, the lines precise and deliberate, the scale notations still visible in the margins. The elevation drawing of the hotel's east facade, the original from 1986. It had been photographed and printed at display size and mounted in a simple black frame. Decorative, impersonal. The kind of thing hotels put on walls to suggest heritage without actually honoring it. There was no attribution. No name. Just the drawing and a small brass plate beneath it that read, Hargrove Grand Hotel, Original Design, 1987. Earl looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at Victor. "All right," he said. He stood, picked up his canvas bag, and walked out. Pat Monroe was in the housekeeping office 2 doors down. She saw his face when he passed her doorway and was out of her chair before he reached the end of the corridor. "Earl, what happened?" he told her. She listened with the tight, controlled stillness of someone absorbing a blow they had been expecting, but had hoped wouldn't land. "I'm going to tell them who you are," she said. "I'm going to walk into Derek Coulter's office right now, and I'm going to tell him exactly, Pat." His voice was quiet, firm, the kind of firm that doesn't require volume. "Not yet," he said. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat back down, slowly. What Pat had not yet told Earl what she had discovered the previous afternoon while pulling archival materials for a guest history inquiry was something that had kept her awake most of the night. 2 weeks earlier, Derek Coulter had sent a memo to the hotel's marketing department. The instruction was specific: conduct a full audit of all guest-facing and internal historical materials and remove any references to named individuals associated with the building's original construction and design. The stated reason was brand consistency and forward-facing identity. The marketing team had complied. The hotel's website history page, which had previously contained a paragraph about Earl Washington, his Howard University background, and his role in the 1994 preservation fight, had been edited down to a single line. The Hargrove Grand was designed by an Atlanta-based architectural firm and opened in October 1987. Every brochure in the guest rooms had been reprinted. The small informational placard that had stood near the east atrium, the one that described the window placement, and its designer, had been removed and not replaced. A display case in the second-floor corridor that had contained a photograph of Earl and James Hargrove Sr. at the hotel's 1987 opening had been cleared out and replaced with a curated arrangement of succulents. This was not an oversight. It was not a rebranding error or an administrative omission. Derek Coulter had known Earl Washington's name. He had been told the history, and he had made a deliberate decision that the name of the black architect who had designed his building, who had saved his building, who had spent 11 years quietly caring for his building, that name did not belong in the story he was telling about it. Pat sat with that knowledge in her chest like a stone. That afternoon, Derek hosted a private lunch in the hotel's executive dining room, 6 men, potential investors in a planned expansion of the Coulter hospitality portfolio. The room was set with precision, good linen, good light, a curated menu printed on cardstock with the hotel's new logo. The conversation moved through revenue projections, occupancy trends, the competitive landscape of the Savannah hospitality market. Derek spoke with the fluency of a man who had given this presentation many times. His language was careful and coded elevated clientele, curated guest experience, properties that attract a certain kind of traveler, but the meaning underneath it was not hard to read for anyone paying attention. A young server, a black woman, 23, 6 months on the job, was clearing the appetizer course when her wrist caught the edge of a water glass. It didn't fall. Nothing spilled. She steadied it immediately, quietly, apologized to the table, and continued clearing. Derek looked at her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say anything at all. He simply looked at her with an expression of flat, undisguised disgust, as though the near accident were a personal affront, a confirmation of something he had always suspected, and then turned back to his investors as if she had ceased to exist. The server walked back to the kitchen. Her hands were very still at her sides. Linda Coulter, seated at the far end of the table, had watched her husband's face. She looked down at her water glass. She did not speak. Marcus Webb was near the corridor entrance when it happened. He had been passing with a luggage cart. He stopped. He watched Derek's expression. He watched the server's hands. He stood there for a moment after she was gone. Then across the lobby, he saw Derek pause near the elevator bank and turn to a group of arriving guests, wealthy, well-dressed, the kind of guests Derek cultivated deliberately. Derek smiled at them and gestured casually toward Earl, who was working quietly near the concierge desk 30 feet away. "Don't mind him," Derek said, his voice carrying just far enough. "We're in the process of upgrading all our staff." The guests glanced at Earl, looked away, kept walking. Marcus Webb's hands tightened around the luggage cart handle until his knuckles ached. He didn't move for a long time. That evening at 6:12, the phone rang in Mayor James Hargrove III's outer office. His assistant Donna picked up. A woman's voice, careful, professional, controlled. "This is Patricia Monroe. I'm the head of housekeeping at the Hargrove Grand Hotel. I need to leave a message for the mayor regarding Earl Washington. The mayor will know who that is." Donna wrote it down, looked at the name, brought it through. The mayor read it. He picked up his phone and called his chief of staff. "Clear Thursday morning," he said. "Something's come up." Wednesday afternoon, 4:30. The Hargrove Grand's annual charity gala was the kind of event that Savannah did well, old money and new money in the same room, pretending they couldn't tell the difference between each other. 200 guests. Evening wear. A string quartet in the East Atrium playing something tasteful and forgettable. The lobby had been transformed since morning, fresh floral arrangements on every surface. The chandeliers turned to full brightness. The marble floor buffed to a mirror shine. Earl had been there since 2 o'clock. Not because anyone asked him to stay late, because he knew what 200 people in a lobby did to a marble floor, and he wanted to be there to manage it. He worked near the entrance, quiet and methodical, placing wet floor signs around the water that guests tracked in from the November rain outside. The doors opened and closed in a steady rhythm. Cold air moved through in pulses. Earl moved his mop in slow, even strokes the way he had moved it for 11 years, the way his mother had moved hers for 30. At 4:45, a boy appeared beside him, 10 years old, maybe 11. Dark blazer, clip-on tie, slightly crooked. The son of one of the gala's charity sponsors, his mother was somewhere near the registration table. He had wandered away with the natural confidence of a child who has never been told that certain spaces aren't for him. He stood next to Earl and watched him mop for a moment with the pure, uncomplicated curiosity of someone who finds everything equally interesting. "Are you the one who built this place?" he asked. "My mom said someone really special built this hotel." Earl stopped. He looked at the boy. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the memory of one. He was about to answer. "Built it." The voice came from behind them both. Derek Coulter had entered the lobby from the side corridor, 4 investors from Atlanta at his shoulder. His game face on, relaxed, proprietary. The easy swagger of a man walking through something he owns. He had heard the boy's question from 10 feet away. He stopped, looked at Earl, looked at the boy, and then he smiled the smile of a man about to say something at someone else's expense. "Son, the only thing this man has built lately is a reason for me to call HR." The investors laughed. One of them laughed loudly. The others made the sound, that same sound from the night before, men auditioning for permission. The boy looked at Earl. His expression shifted, uncertain now, the way children look when the adult world stops making sense. Earl looked back at him. He didn't react to Derek. He didn't flinch, didn't tighten, didn't look away. He just looked at the boy with that same quiet steadiness and gave him the smallest nod. It's all right, the way you'd reassure someone during a storm. Derek was already moving past them, gesturing for his investors to follow, narrating the lobby renovation as they walked. We pulled out all the original fixtures in here. They were fine for 1987. But this is a different property now. Different clientele. He stopped near the center of the lobby, glanced back at Earl. Then, with the offhand cruelty of a man who doesn't need to try very hard, he turned to his investors and gestured loosely in Earl's direction. 70 years old and still mopping floors. You know what? I'll give him credit for showing up. A beat. That's about all I'll give him. More laughter. Easy compliant, the laughter of men who needed Derek's goodwill more than they needed their own dignity. Victor. Victor Sloan materialized from somewhere near the concierge desk. Get him out of the lobby. Gala's starting. I don't want guests looking at this. Victor crossed the floor. He took Earl by the arm, not roughly, but without any pretense of gentleness either, and steered him toward the front entrance. Earl went. He didn't pull back. He didn't speak. He carried the mop handle loosely in his free hand and walked at Victor's pace, and as they crossed the lobby, he looked down at the floor the way you look at something you love when you know you're leaving it. The marble caught the chandelier light. Cream and gray, warm in the glow. His mother had looked at floors like this her whole life from the wrong angle. He had spent his career making sure floors like this existed. He had chosen this specific stone. He had driven to a quarry in Elberton, Georgia, on a Tuesday in 1986, and crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the surface to feel the grain of it. He had written the specification himself in longhand on a yellow legal pad. The front doors opened. The cold hit him. Victor released his arm and stepped back inside without a word. Earl stood on the front steps of the Hargrove Grand Hotel in the November rain. He did not move. He did not look for shelter. He stood straight, the mop still in his hand, and let the rain fall on the shoulders of his gray uniform and darken the fabric in slow spreading patches. Behind the glass doors, the gala continued. Light and warmth and the sound of the string quartet. Marcus Webb was at the concierge desk. He had watched everything, the boy, the laughter, the arm, the doors. Now he stood very still, his hands flat on the desk surface, watching Earl through the glass. His jaw was clenched so hard, his back teeth ached. Patricia Monroe came through the service corridor entrance and stopped when she saw the empty space where Earl had been standing. She looked at the wet floor signs still in place. She looked at the abandoned mop cart near the entrance column. She looked through the glass doors. Earl, standing in the rain, straight-backed, still. Pat Monroe had worked in this building for 22 years. She had managed that career with professionalism and care. She had absorbed things and filed them away and continued and never let it show. She stood at the edge of the lobby and looked through the glass at Earl Washington, standing in the rain outside the building he had designed, and for the first time in 22 years, something inside her simply refused to be filed away. Her hand was already reaching for her phone when the lobby doors opened from outside. Congressman Raymond Osei walked in from the rain, shaking water from his coat. He looked across the lobby toward the doors, and through the glass he saw the gray uniform, the straight back, the rain. His face went very still. He looked at the lobby, at the gala, at the chandeliers throwing light across the marble floor. Then he looked back through the glass at Earl. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. Congressman Raymond Osei did not go to the front desk. He did not check in. He did not hand his coat to the attendant waiting near the entrance. He walked back through the lobby doors into the rain. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit that cost $1,100. He did not appear to notice or care. He walked to where Earl was standing on the front steps and stood beside him close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and he looked straight ahead at the wet street and the November dark. "Earl," he said, "tell me what happened." Earl told him. The same way he told things quietly, without performance, just the sequence of events in the order they occurred. The staff meeting, Victor's office, the gala, the boy, the investors. Derek's hand gesturing in his direction, like he was pointing at something that needed to be removed. Osei listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make sounds of sympathy or outrage. He just listened with the focused stillness of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where listening was a form of power. When Earl finished, Osei was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside. Victor told me to wait out here until the gala. I'm a United States congressman," Osei said, with no particular heat, the way you state a fact that has practical implications. "And I'm telling you to come inside." They walked through the front doors together. Osei's hand rested on Earl's shoulder, not guiding, not supporting, just present. A declaration visible to anyone watching. Victor Sloan saw them from across the lobby. He was already moving toward them, the managed professional walk of someone about to handle a situation, when Osei looked at him directly and said at normal conversational volume, "Don't." Victor stopped. He stood in the center of the lobby for a moment, with nowhere to go, and then he turned and walked back toward the corridor, the way a man walks when he's pretending he was going that direction anyway. Osei took Earl upstairs to his suite on the 6th floor. He ordered room service soup, good bread coffee, and found a dry shirt in his luggage that Earl could change into. They sat at the small table near the window, and the congressman ate nothing and watched Earl eat, and neither of them said much for a while. Outside, the rain continued. Below them, the gala hummed along in the ballroom. "I should have come sooner," Osei said eventually. "You're here now," Earl said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Earl agreed. "But it's what there is." Downstairs, the story was moving through the hotel the way stories move through buildings full of people who know each other in fragments, in whispered hallway exchanges, in the particular look that passes between two colleagues who have both just learned the same thing. The gala staff had seen it. 3 of the parking attendants had seen it. The young server from the charity registration table. The same woman whose near accident with the water glass had earned her Derek's flat, disgusted stare 2 days earlier, had been near the entrance when Victor walked Earl out, and she had stood very still watching through the glass for 30 seconds before someone called her name and she had to go back to work. Marcus Webb had seen all of it. He was still at the concierge desk. His shift ended at 6, but he hadn't moved. He sat on his stool and looked at the lobby, the flowers, the light, the marble floor Earl had chosen, and he thought about the boy in the clip-on tie who had asked a simple question and gotten cruelty for an answer, and about the investors who had laughed, and about Derek Coulter's hand making that loose, dismissive gesture. At 5:45, during a quiet moment, Marcus took out his phone. He turned the camera on himself. He kept his voice low and steady. "I need people to know what happened here today," he said. An old black man was mopping the lobby floor. The CEO of this hotel told his investors that the only thing the man had built lately was a reason to call HR. Then he had him walked out into the rain, in front of a child, in front of 200 guests. He paused. The old man didn't say anything. He just looked at the floor and let them take him outside. And I keep thinking he looked at that floor like it belonged to him, like he knew something about it that none of the rest of us did. He stopped the recording. He looked at it. He didn't post it. He put his phone in his pocket and sat with it for a while. Not yet. He wasn't sure why. He just knew it wasn't time yet. Linda Coulter found her husband in the back office at 6:15, after the first wave of gala guests had moved from the lobby to the ballroom. She closed the door behind her. Derek was on his phone. He held up a finger 1 minute and finished his call. Then he looked at her. "You had an old man walked out into the rain," she said. "In front of 200 people. In front of a child. I had a staffing issue managed during a major event. He was mopping a floor, Derek. He was in the way. He was doing his job." Derek's expression closed, the way it always closed when the conversation was no longer about something he controlled. "Linda, I'm not doing this right now." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her evening bag from the chair and walked out without another word. In her housekeeping office, Pat Monroe sat alone with the door closed and her phone in her hand. She had already made the call to the mayor's office that afternoon, 4 careful minutes. Just the facts, no embellishment. She didn't know if it would matter. She hoped it would matter. She sat in the quiet and listened to the gala sounds coming through the walls, music, laughter, crystal, and thought about 11 years of Earl arriving through the service entrance at 6 in the morning, pressing his uniform, clipping his name tag straight. At 9:47, Mayor James Hargrove III's personal cell phone lit up on his nightstand. A text from an unsaved number. 2 lines. "Earl Washington was thrown out into the rain today at your hotel. Thought you should know before tomorrow." The mayor stared at the screen. He read it twice. 3 times. He set the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he picked it up again and called his chief of staff. "Clear my morning," he said. "All of it." Thursday morning. Earl did not go to the hotel. For the first time in 11 years, he did not pack his canvas bag, did not press his uniform, did not walk to the service entrance on Abercorn Street. He sat at his drafting table in his house on Habersham Street, a narrow 2-story on a block of old oaks, the kind of house that had absorbed decades of quiet work, and he looked at the blueprints he had spread across the table the night before, the original drawings of the Hargrove Grand. He had kept a full set rolled in a cardboard tube in the closet of his spare room. He had taken them out at midnight and unrolled them carefully and laid them flat with small weights at the corners, the way you lay out something you need to look at, honestly. He sat with them for a long time. His phone rang at 8:15. He looked at the screen. James Hargrove III. He picked up. "Uncle Earl," the mayor said. "Tell me what happened," Earl told him. The same quiet account. The staff meeting. Victor's office. The boy at the gala. Derek's words to his investors. The rain. The mayor listened without speaking. Earl could hear him breathing on the other end, steady, controlled, the breathing of a man keeping himself contained. When Earl finished, the silence lasted 4 seconds. "I'll handle it," the mayor said. "James," Earl's voice was gentle but precise. "Don't make a scene." "Too late," the mayor said, and hung up. At 10:15, a black SUV pulled up to the front entrance of the Hargrove Grand Hotel. Mayor James Hargrove III stepped out, followed by 2 aides and a woman. Earl would have recognized Dr. Carol Sims, director of the Georgia Office of Historic Preservation, a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried authority of someone who has spent a career making bureaucratic processes feel inevitable. The mayor did not call ahead. He did not send his office to announce him. He walked through the front doors of the Hargrove Grand Hotel the way his father had walked through them in 1987, like a man who had a reason to be there that preceded the current ownership by several decades. The front desk clerk looked up and went slightly pale. "Is Mr. Coulter available?" the mayor asked. Pleasantly, the way pleasant can be its own form of pressure. Derek was in a third-floor meeting about the gala's revenue performance when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen front desk and excused himself. He came downstairs, straightening his jacket, running the social calculation, automatically mayor pre-dinner appearance. good opportunity to cultivate the relationship. He came around the base of the staircase with his hand already extended and his best smile already deployed. The mayor did not take his hand immediately. He let it hang in the air for one beat, just long enough, and then shook it. "Mayor Hargrove, great timing. I was looking forward to this evening." "Mr. Coulter," the mayor said, "thank you for coming down." He gestured toward the center of the lobby, the open marble floor, the chandelier light, the east atrium windows. "Walk with me for a moment." They walked. Derek kept his smile in place. Around them, the lobby held its usual morning activity, a few guests at the front desk, 2 staff members near the concierge station, a housekeeper with a cart near the corridor entrance. Nobody appeared to be listening. Everyone was listening. The mayor stopped at the center of the lobby and looked up. "Do you know who designed this building?" he asked. Derek blinked. The question was unexpected, not the content of a pre-dinner goodwill visit. "I believe the original architect was based in Earl Washington," the mayor said. "Howard University class of 1974. He was among the first licensed black architects in the state of Georgia." He paused. "He designed every inch of this lobby. Those windows, the angle they sit at, the way the light comes through in the morning, that was his calculation. That floor you're standing on, he selected that stone personally. He drove to the quarry himself." Derek said nothing. His smile had not disappeared entirely, but it had changed character. It was no longer performing confidence. It was performing composure, which is a different thing. "He was my father's closest friend," the mayor continued. His voice was even unhurried, the voice of a man who had all the time in the world. "He was present when I was born. He sat in the front row at my father's funeral. And for the last 11 years, he has come to this building twice a week as a volunteer, not because anyone asked him to, but because this building is his life's work and he wanted to stay close to it." Around them, the lobby had gone quiet. Not empty people were still there. Staff and guests and the housekeeper with her cart, but quiet in the way spaces go quiet when something important is happening at the center of them. "I understand," the mayor said, "that on Wednesday evening, during your charity gala, Mr. Washington was removed from this lobby and left standing in the rain." Derek opened his mouth. "Mayor Hargrove, there was a misunderstanding about staffing during a major event. He built this lobby," the mayor said, simply, "without heat, the way you correct a factual error. He designed those windows. He chose that marble. He submitted the original permits for this property before you were old enough to sign a contract. And in 1994, when the city wanted to demolish this block for a highway expansion, Earl Washington spent 18 months fighting to save it. This building exists because of him." The silence in the lobby was absolute now. At the concierge desk, Marcus Webb had gone completely still. At the corridor entrance, Pat Monroe stood with both hands wrapped around her cart handle, not moving. Derek's composure was holding barely visibly the way a structure holds when you can see the stress lines forming. There was no intention to, Mr. Coulter." The mayor turned to face him fully. "I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to call Earl Washington right now and ask him to come here." He turned to one of his aides. Then he looked back at Derek. "I want him in this lobby, and I want to be standing here when he walks through that door." Derek stared at him. The mayor waited. In the silence, the morning light moved through the east atrium windows at 17 degrees and crossed the marble floor in a slow diagonal line exactly as it had been designed to do 38 years ago by the man who was not in the room. Earl arrived 40 minutes later. He came through the front doors, not the service entrance, not the side corridor, the front doors. The way guests came in, the way James Hargrove Sr. had walked in the first time he came to Earl's office on MLK Boulevard with an idea and a handshake. He was wearing a clean shirt and a sport coat, dark navy, slightly worn at the elbows. No name tag, no canvas bag. He carried himself the way he always carried himself, unhurried, straight, as if the ground beneath him were something he had personally verified was solid. The lobby was fuller than it had been 20 minutes ago. Word had moved through the building the way it always moves through buildings full of people who have been waiting for something, quickly, quietly pulling people toward it. Staff had found reasons to be near the lobby. A housekeeper with a cart that hadn't moved in 15 minutes. 2 bellhops near the concierge desk. Pat Monroe at the corridor entrance, arms folded, eyes forward. Marcus Webb was at his station. He watched Earl come through the doors and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been wound tight since Wednesday afternoon, since the boy in the clip-on tie, since the sound of those investors laughing, eased just slightly, like a knot beginning to work itself loose. Mayor Hargrove crossed the lobby when he saw Earl come through the door. He crossed it the way his father would have crossed it, without hesitation, without calculation, and he put both arms around Earl Washington in the center of the Hargrove Grand Hotel and held on. Earl patted his back. Once, twice, the way he had always done. "I'm sorry, Uncle Earl," the mayor said quietly, close enough that only Earl could hear it. "This should never have happened." "You turned out fine, James," Earl said. "Your father would say the same." They separated. The mayor kept one hand on Earl's shoulder and turned to face the lobby, to face Derek Coulter, who was standing 15 feet away, with his hands at his sides and an expression that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. Congressman Osei stepped forward from where he had been standing, near the east atrium. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier, called by the mayor's office, and had waited quietly, in the way that men wait when they know. The moment they're waiting for is worth waiting for. He stood beside Earl. The three of them, the mayor, the congressman, the architect, in the center of the lobby. Derek looked at them. His investors from the previous afternoon were checking out at the front desk behind him. 2 of them had stopped what they were doing. They were watching. The mayor spoke. His voice was even and clear and carried to every corner of the room. "Mr. Coulter, this building sits on land that holds a city historical preservation designation, a designation that Earl Washington personally argued for before the Planning Commission in 1994, over 18 months, against significant opposition, at no charge and at no one's request. That designation comes up for renewal every 10 years. The next review is in 14 months. Derek's mouth opened. "I'd recommend that, between now and then, you think very carefully about how this property honors the legacy of the people who built it." The silence was complete. Then Congressman Osei reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He held it up, not to show anyone, just to read from, and began to speak. "This morning I received an email from a former employee of Coulter Hospitality Group. The email references an internal briefing that took place 18 months ago prior to a board strategy session." He looked up at Derek. "You were presented with a full ownership and heritage report on this property. The report included Earl Washington's name, his architectural credentials, his role in the 1994 preservation appeal, and his ongoing volunteer relationship with the building." He lowered the phone. "You didn't misidentify him, Mr. Coulter. You didn't overlook him. You knew exactly who he was. You knew when you had his name removed from the hotel's historical materials. You knew when you terminated his volunteer placement, and you knew on Wednesday evening when you stood in this lobby and told your investors that the only thing he had built lately was a reason to call HR." The lobby held its breath. Derek Coulter stood in the center of his hotel, his marble floor, his chandeliers, his carefully curated guest experience, and he had nothing. No spin, no reframe, no borrowed authority. He had known. Everyone in the room now understood that he had known. The difference between ignorance and contempt had just been removed from the table. His two investors at the front desk had stopped pretending to check out. Linda Coulter appeared at the mezzanine railing above. She had heard everything. She looked down at her husband, with an expression that contained several years of private observations arriving simultaneously at a single conclusion. Osei turned to Earl. His voice shifted warmer, the voice of an old friendship rather than a congressional record. Earl, I have been trying to get you to consult on the federal courthouse project for 2 years. You keep saying no. I'm not accepting that anymore. Earl looked at him. Raymond, you never did know how to take no. I know how to take no. I choose not to. Something moved through the lobby, then not laughter exactly, but its cousin, the release of something that had been compressed too long. Pat Monroe's shoulders dropped half an inch. Marcus Webb looked at the floor and pressed his lips together. Earl looked around the lobby slowly. The atrium windows, the marble floor, the east wall where the morning light had already completed its diagonal crossing and was warming the base of the far column exactly as calculated. Then he looked at the wall near the corridor entrance, the wall that faced the lobby visible to every guest who came through the front doors, and he stopped. The display case, the one that had held the photograph of Earl and James Hargrove Sr. at the 1987 opening. The succulents were still there, arranged in their careful, tasteful, historically indifferent pattern. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Derek Coulter. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Derek followed his gaze to the display case. And then for the first time since any of this had begun, something crossed Derek Coulter's face that was not performance and not calculation, and not the managed composure of a man protecting an asset. It was recognition. The specific, belated, irreversible recognition of a man understanding too late in public, in front of everyone exactly what he had done. Marcus Webb, watching from the concierge desk, quietly took out his phone and pressed post. Marcus Webb's video went up at 11:14 on a Thursday morning. By noon, it had 40,000 views. By 3 in the afternoon, it had crossed 200,000. By the time the sun went down over Savannah that evening, it had 800,000 pommel, and the number was still climbing, the way a fire climbs when the wind is right, steadily, hungrily, without needing anyone to tend it. The video was 90 seconds long. No music, no graphics. Just Marcus on camera speaking in the measured voice of a man who had decided to stop being a bystander. He described what he had witnessed. The boy with the clip-on tie asking his simple question. Derek's response to his investors. The arm. The rain. The gray uniform darkening at the shoulders. And then, and this was the part that made people stop scrolling, stop whatever they were doing, and watch again, he said. The man they walked out into the rain designed that lobby. He chose the floor they made him mop. He saved the building they threw him out of. And the CEO knew. He knew the whole time. That last sentence. That was the part that traveled. By Friday morning, the video had crossed 4 million views, and the Hargrove Grand Hotel was the most searched property on every travel platform in the Southeast. The Savannah Morning News ran it on the front page. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution picked it up by Friday afternoon. By Saturday, it had gone national, the story landing in the feeds of people who had never been to Savannah, had never heard of the Hargrove Grand, had never thought about the names of the architects whose buildings they walked through every day of their lives. The headline that spread furthest, shared more than any other, was a simple one from a black architecture magazine that had been covering Earl Washington's career for 30 years. The man who designed this hotel was thrown out of it in the rain. The CEO knew who he was. The detail that snagged people, the detail that made them stop and reread and share, appeared in a tweet from an account with 2.3 million followers. The tweet read, "The man who designed the Hargrove Grand personally selected the lobby marble from a quarry in Carrara, Italy in 1986. That's the same floor they made him mop before throwing him into the rain. The architecture community responded within hours. Comment sections filled with people pointing out that Carrara marble imported from Italy in 1986 for a private hotel project in Savannah, Georgia, would have cost upward of $2.8 million, an implausible figure for a regional development of that era when most American hotels of comparable size used domestic stone. The quarry Earl had actually visited was in Elberton, Georgia. The tweet was wrong on every verifiable detail. It had 600,000 retweets. The comment sections became a secondary event. Architects and construction historians, and people who had simply lived in Savannah long enough to know the building, arguing about Italian marble and Georgia quarries, and what the distinction proved or didn't prove about the story's credibility, while the story itself kept growing indifferent to the footnotes. Mayor Hargrove issued a formal statement Friday afternoon from his office on Bay Street. It was 4 paragraphs long, and it did not hedge. Earl Washington is one of Savannah's most significant architectural contributors. What occurred at the Hargrove Grand Hotel on Wednesday evening was not a staffing misunderstanding. It was the treatment of a distinguished member of this community, as though his history, his work, and his dignity did not exist. Savannah knows better than this. We are called to do better than this. Congressman Osei issued a statement from Washington the same afternoon, accompanied by a photograph taken in the hotel lobby the previous morning, himself and Earl standing together beneath the east atrium windows. The caption was 3 words, "Still here, still building." It became the most shared image of the week. The Georgia Historical Society announced Friday evening that it was opening a formal review of cultural stewardship practices at preservation-listed properties across the state. The language of the announcement was procedural and carefully neutral. The implication was not. The hotel's rating on every major booking platform moved in one direction: 4.6 to 3.1 in 72 hours. Review after review from people who had never stayed there and now never would, from former guests who had stayed there and felt differently about it now, from people who simply wanted the record to reflect something describing the video, the culture, the 40 years of a man's work treated as decoration, while the man himself was treated as an inconvenience. 3 of Derek's investors, including 2 who had been in the lobby Wednesday afternoon, who had laughed at the right moments, who had let the sound come out of them before they were sure they were allowed to, quietly withdrew from the pending joint development deal. No press release, no explanation, just letters from legal departments and the specific silence of people putting distance between themselves and a liability they had personally witnessed being created. On Saturday morning, Linda Coulter gave a brief interview to a journalist from the Savannah Morning News. She had not cleared it with Derek's PR team. She sat in a coffee shop on Whitaker Street and spoke for 12 minutes. She did not attack her husband. She did not perform contrition on his behalf. She said only this: "I was there on Wednesday. I saw what happened, and I told him that evening what I saw. I think he's had a great deal of thinking to do this week." It was widely understood to be its own kind of verdict. On Saturday afternoon, a certified letter arrived at Earl's house on Habersham Street. Official letterhead: the Georgia Office of Historic Preservation. It informed him that his architectural contribution to the Hargrove Grand Hotel was being formally entered into the state's Heritage Registry. His name, his credentials, his role in the 1994 preservation appeal, all of it. Permanent record. The letter had been filed 3 days before the gala. Before the rain. Before Marcus Webb's video. Before any of it. Earl sat at his drafting table and read it twice. He set it down carefully on top of the blueprints. He looked at the east window of his own house. The light was coming through at the wrong angle, not 17 degrees, just whatever angle the afternoon happened to offer. Not calculated, not designed, but warm. Still warm. He sat with it for a long time. The board of Coulter Hospitality Group met the following Tuesday. Derek owned 60% of the company. The remaining 40% was held by outside investors, 3 funds, and 2 private individuals, all of whom had spent the previous 5 days watching the Hargrove Grand's booking numbers fall, their own names quietly searched in connection with the story, and their legal teams advised them on the parameters of reputational liability. The meeting was not long. The outside investors presented 2 conditions for their continued participation in the portfolio: a formal public apology from Derek Coulter, issued under his own name, and a third-party workplace culture audit of all Coulter hospitality properties within 90 days. Derek issued the apology on Wednesday morning. It was written by his PR firm, reviewed by his legal team, and read from a prepared statement at a brief press availability outside the hotel. He stood at a portable podium in a gray suit, not the navy one, not the one with the polished cufflinks, and read 7 sentences acknowledging that his treatment of Earl Washington had been wrong, that it did not reflect the values of the Coulter Hospitality Group going forward, and that he was committed to fostering a culture of dignity and respect across all his properties. He did not take questions. The internet noticed that he said, "did not reflect the values of," rather than "is not who I am." The distinction was widely discussed. Victor Sloan submitted his resignation the same week. He cited personal reasons. He accepted a general manager position at a mid-range hotel chain in Tampa. On his last day, he cleaned out his office without speaking to anyone except the facilities staff who helped him carry boxes to his car and whom he thanked for the first time in 3 years of working beside them by name. The culture audit came back 6 weeks later. It found systemic issues in hiring practices, complaint documentation, and management conduct across 4 of the 7 Coulter properties. The report was 43 pages. The outside investors received a full copy. Derek received a full copy. The findings were not made public, but enough of the language leaked through the standard channels of people who had read it and talked to people who asked that the shape of it became generally understood. Derek retained ownership of the Hargrove Grand. He stepped back from day-to-day management under board guidance, handing operational control to a new general manager. A woman named Diane Okafor, brought in from a hospitality group in Charlotte, who had a reputation for 2 things: genuine operational excellence and an absolute intolerance for the treatment of service staff as a lesser category of human being. She started on a Monday and spent her first 2 hours walking every service corridor in the building, introducing herself to every person she encountered and learning their names. She was still learning names by Wednesday. The hotel's first act under new management, before any rebranding initiative, before any revenue strategy, before any investor presentation, was the renovation of the basement staff break room. New table, real chairs, a coffee maker that worked, a refrigerator, proper lighting that did not flicker, a window cut into the exterior wall where structural assessment confirmed it was possible that let in actual daylight. On the wall, framed in simple dark wood, a print of the original 1987 lobby elevation drawing. Clean, precise, the ink lines still sharp after nearly 4 decades. Beneath it, in clean black type on a brass plate designed by Earl Washington, 1987. Architect, preservationist, builder. His name, in his building, where it had always belonged. Pat Monroe did not change her title. She was still head of housekeeping, still the person who knew which elevator ran slow in cold weather and which guest rooms got too much afternoon heat in July. But she began every new employee orientation, everyone without exception, with the same story. She told them about Earl, about Howard University, and the 1987 opening, and the 1994 preservation fight, and the Tuesday mornings with the canvas bag, and the pressed uniform, and the name tag clipped straight. She told them about the marble floor, and the east atrium windows, and the 17-degree angle, And then she told them what happened at the gala. She told it plainly without drama, because the plain version was dramatic enough. And she ended it the same way every time. Before you learn anything else about this hotel, you know who built it. You don't forget that. Marcus Webb was promoted to front desk supervisor 8 weeks after the video. He framed a screenshot of the video at 4.2 million views, not out of pride exactly, but as a reminder. He kept it in his wallet. On days when staying quiet felt easier than not staying quiet, he took it out and looked at it briefly and put it back. The federal courthouse consulting project, the one Congressman Osei had been trying to get Earl to accept for 2 years, Earl agreed to in December. He worked with Osei's team through the winter, and into the spring, his drafting table covered again in the organized complexity of a major public building taking shape on paper. The project was featured in Architectural Digest 11 months later. The headline was "The Return of Earl Washington." The photograph showed him at his drafting table in the house on Habersham Street, the morning light coming through the east window. Blueprints spread flat, small weights at the corners. He was quoted once in the piece. A journalist had asked him what it felt like to be recognized finally after so many years. Earl had looked at the question for a moment, the way he looked at everything carefully, without hurry. "I was always here," he said. "Recognition doesn't change the work. It just means more people can finally see it." On a Tuesday morning, Earl came back to the Hargrove Grand, not in a cleaning uniform. In his good jacket, the dark navy slightly worn at the elbows, with a consultant's badge clipped to the lapel. Heritage Advisor. The title had been Diane Okafor's idea. Earl had accepted it on the same condition he had stated from the beginning, the break room first. He came through the front doors and stood in the center of the lobby. The morning light was moving through the east atrium at 17 degrees, crossing the marble floor in its slow diagonal. Warming the base of the far column at 8:15, exactly as calculated in 1986, on a drafting table on MLK Boulevard, with a protractor and a set of sun-angle charts. Pat Monroe came through the service corridor with her cart. She saw him standing there. She stopped. She looked at him, the jacket, the badge, the lobby light falling across him, the way he had designed it to fall. She smiled. "Back where you belong." Earl looked up at the light. He watched it move. "Never really left," he said. Earl Washington never stopped building, even when the world stopped looking. He pressed his uniform, clipped his name tag straight, and showed up to care for something he had made long after the people in charge had decided his name didn't matter. Dignity isn't granted by the powerful. It's carried by the people who keep showing up anyway. Drop your story in the comments. Have you ever been overlooked by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? I want to read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe. If you haven't, there are more stories like this one and you don't want to miss them.